I agree very much that maybe the most cost-effective way to get more milkweeds on the landscape on a continental scale will involve how rangelands and pasture lands are managed, and that where the soil has not been plowed, the seeds and the tubers are probably out there, and so changing management strategies can bring those back. But another strategy that many people are interested in is where there's grassland restoration going on land that has been plowed, that's been used for farmland, and for various reasons the landowners would like it to go back into native grassland. And so in those cases, we think that it would be beneficial to include native milkweed ecotypes, and that's a word that I like to use, to include those in the seed mixes. Briefly, these tables here, and I think this kind of repeats what Julie had, but these are some of the projects that Fish and Wildlife Service is funding in Texas, and actually 3 of those projects are going to involve the partnership between the NRCS Plant Materials Center in Kingsville and South Texas Natives, which is part of Texas A&M Kingsville. And Forrest Smith is here, so I don't know if you're going to have a chance to talk about that. And we do have 2 projects that we're funding that are involved with finding seeds of native Texas ecotypes of milkweeds and going through the early stages of seed increase so that it can be possible for commercial seed producers to produce these and sell them to the public. And I'm concerned about this because there's so much interest in milkweeds. People do want to buy these, but there's just no commercial production yet. I know Native American Seed is trying to ramp that up, and I hope to see that soon. But you know, the temptation is going to be to buy seed from some other part of the U.S. where they're a few years ahead of us in this interest. And I think that we could end up doing more harm than good by bringing in maladapted ecotypes. The general public doesn't understand that antelope horns in central Texas is the same species as antelope horns somewhere else, but it may be a different genetic group. But anyway, that said, milkweeds are going to be very challenging to work with for a variety of reasons. They're not going to lend themselves to mechanical seed harvest. It can take several years to go from a seed to where you're harvesting more seed from that plant. The harvest requires careful timing, and so on. So one result of that is that we're not going to see milkweeds seeds be down in the same price range as little blue stem and that sort of thing. And most of the forb species are somewhat more expensive seeds than, say, native grass seeds. But on the other hand, we don't necessarily need huge populations of forbs out on restored grassland. And again, if we can just get them established, then the management of that grassland can lead to stable long-term populations. I know this chart is too small to see. The whole idea of it is I looked at all the University of Texas herbarium records of milkweeds. I think there were 36 species, but there are just a few that have been recorded the most times in the most places. And interestingly enough, that includes some of the top 3 species that monarch biologists have identified as being useful to monarchs in Texas. And that would include the antelope horns, Asperula, Enothyroides, the Yerba de Sisopes, and Viridis, the green milkweed. But I think that we can add to this list, and we shouldn't be locked into a set strategy, and we may find in a particular area that some of the other species are useful. And Julie already showed you my little map here. The counties that don't have records don't necessarily mean that those milkweeds are not there. It may mean that someone didn't collect there. But you can see that if you were to start with a strategy looking at just 3 species, you could get most of the state covered. Monarch Watch does acknowledge that this ecotype thing is important, but I think these ecoregions that you see here are going to be way too big. I would suggest at the very minimum focusing down to something like Gould's ecoregions. When it comes to containerized production of milkweeds, I think we can make some improvements in helping people understand good silvicultural methods. And this is really my last slide. I had done a seed germination test, and I took some of the germinated seeds just for friends, planted them in containers. And I had several plants that grew during the summer, and then in November they died. And I had heard a lot of people say that, milkweeds, you can't grow them in containers because they have high mortality. And then I brought them inside and put them on my windowsill, and a month later they resprouted. So they were able to form perennial tubers in only 3 months. So I think that's just interesting factoid. So my conclusion is that, okay, I'll get to you in a second, is that although I agree with Lee that the major part of our effort should involve how rangelands are managed, I also think that in parts of the country where there are large regions that are basic, just where pollinator habit is depleted, that a long-term strategy could involve lots of small areas that are restored specifically for pollinator habitat. And I had worked for many years in South Texas, and I think that's one region where that could be a big benefit. As we were mentioning yesterday, there's a lot of vegetable production down there that needs pollinators. They have to pay apiaries to come around and bring honeybees around, so they're short on pollinators. That would be one example. And parts of the monarch migratory route are pretty devoid of pollinator habitat. So I just think it's, as a botanist in the Fish and Wildlife Service, let me tell you, Director Ash does not call me up on a regular basis to ask my opinion or on policy. But if he were ever to do that, I would say, in talking to people, our partners and so forth, you get this kind of skepticism like, oh, monarchs, you guys are just on that, because of the petition, but that'll fade. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that anything we do for monarchs, we will be doing for all pollinators. And I think that the interest and the importance of pollinator conservation is going to continue. This is just I'm not a policy maker, don't report that up the line. This is my personal prediction that pollinator conservation is going to continue to be very important for the long term, and that one subset of that is going to be getting pollinators back into landscapes where their habitats have just been completely taken out. And that the last idea, just seed that I'm planting here, is that we probably don't need huge, massive, thousands of acres size restoration projects. But, I think if you had like 1 acre of good pollinator habitat in every 1,000 acres or something like that, that might really have a very large benefit. questions? Oh yeah, there was already one from the back. Yes.
Oh, I was curious. Somebody said that was asperula.
Yes, it is asperula. And I have a Partners for Fish and Wildlife cooperator that we've been working with, who's all fired up about pollinators and stuff. And we went out collecting milkweed seeds last summer. And he actually collected Enotheroides seeds and has some of those growing. And he found the same thing. They planted a bunch of seeds in Hyco trays, and they were doing great, and then as winter came around and they just died back. He said they're all starting to come back up.
You mentioned putting milkweed seed in seed mixes.